The Kaph is a crown, or keter in Hebrew. It's actually the crown of Messiah. The crown of Messiah. And it will incorporate all three of the crowns given to Israel. So let's draw. That's my idea of a crown. This is the crown of Messiah, which will incorporate all of the three crowns given to Israel at Mount Sinai. That's the crown of priesthood, kingship, and Torah. Now, all three of these crowns will be incorporated in the crown of Messiah. You see, when the nation, following its leaders, rejected Jesus' messianic claim and declared his distinctly messianic miracles to have been performed by demonic means, you find that in Luke 11:15, John 7:20, and so on, Israel forfeited the crowns of priesthood and kingship. In other words, they lost both their temple and their country. But they were permitted to retain the crown of Torah to facilitate their survival until the end of this age. This is the grace of God. The Jewish people will never be allowed to disappear. The crown of priesthood was lost when the temple was destroyed in AD 70. You can't have priests without a temple. Incidentally, the sages teach that whilst the first temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed because of idolatry, immorality and murder, the loss of the second temple, that of Jesus' time, Herod's temple, was attributed to the sin of, listen to this, causeless hatred. That's very interesting because it's a perfect description of the leadership's attitude to Jesus. They lost their temple because of their causeless hatred of Jesus. And the crown of kingship was lost when the Jews were finally wrenched from the land of Israel in AD 135 and forbidden to return. A king needs a land over which to rule. So they lost their temple, they lost their land. But the crown of Torah has remained with them since the loss of the temple and the land. All three crowns will be brought together in the one crown of Messiah, Jesus. When Israel finally acknowledges Jesus' messiahship and Jesus returns to this earth as prophet, priest and king and reigns from Mount Zion. This is the dignity within the letter Kaph. But the Kaph is skilled also at modest understatement. It's used to modify a sentence. For instance, if I wanted to avoid sounding too self-assured or too bold in my approach to a sensitive subject, I could prefix the letter Kaph to a chosen word. Take the case of a divine appearance. Daniel experienced an amazing and dramatic night vision which depicted the scene in heaven before the coming of the Messiah to the earth. But he refrained from a direct reference to the messianic figure. He writes, one like the Son of Man. It's found in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. And these are the words we're interested in. Kavah Enosh. That says, like a son of man. And there's the Kaph, which is added. If you remove that Kaph, it would just say, Bar Enosh, a son of man. But Daniel, out of reverence, didn't want to say a son of man. So he said, like a son of man. And he added the Kaph there at the beginning, in order to veil the whole thing, as it were, with reverence. He humbly, as it were, averts his eyes. Now the Kaph is able to cast a veil of modesty wherever appropriate. And in the same spirit as this, John writes in Revelation chapter 1 verse 13, and in the midst of the seven candlesticks, I saw one like unto the Son of Man. It's very similar to this Kavah Enosh, one like a Son of Man. Like the Kaph, the great men of God were cognizant of the glory of God, and therefore never attempted definition, rather description. And even then, the words are a veil more than an exposure. The language of the Spirit is that of poetry, music, and always reverence. And God said, "Let there be light." And God walked in the cool of the day, and so on. In Genesis chapter 23, verse 2, the Kaph is employed to perform the sensitive task of conveying the grief of Abraham at the loss of his wife, Sarah. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Genesis chapter 23, verse 2, and we're looking at these words. V'yavo Abraham, and Abraham came, lispod, to mourn or bewail, Sarah, v'livkotah, and to weep for her, v'livkotah. And there's the little Kaph there, a diminished Kaph, smaller than all the other letters. It indicates that the mourning of Abraham was restrained due to his awareness that the soul of his wife, Sarah, was immortal, and that the parting was therefore temporary. It's also said that Abraham bore his grief privately, without excessive public show. Dignity in grief is also seen in the life of Jesus. In the account of the death and resurrection of Lazarus, John chapter 11, Mary's grief is described by a specific Greek word which means to weep loudly. The word is kliousan, verse 33. And the same word is used for the weeping of the Jews who attended her. However, for the grief of Jesus in verse 35, the writer selects a different word, and this word means to shed silent tears, edarusan. Silent sorrow, the dignity and strength of Jesus. Also, he knew that believers are only sleeping until he awakens them at the resurrection. The resurrection unto glory finds expression in the Kaph. Finally, the shape has been likened to a man with his head and shoulders bent, humble or burdened. This, however, is only the shape of the letter as it appears anywhere in the word, except at the very end, when it drastically changes its appearance, becoming upright and straightened. So also is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It's sown in weakness. It is raised in power. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 42 following.